discuss that and the trade wars. We're joined by Professor of International Relations at WITS, John Stremler. Thank you for being with us,
Good evening.
Prof.
Good evening.
The big question, could there be war in the Middle East?
Well, there could be more instability, more unpredictability. This causes concern for all countries, but including South Africa. On the two issues of trade and of the Middle East and Iran, South Africa has always taken a very consistent position about the importance of multilateralism, and it does have lots of friends internationally beyond the United States. But let me start with the trade thing first and start to say, look, there's a short-term risk for South Africa if this continues to escalate. Trump may be sounding reassuring, but we don't know whether he's ignorant of trade. We don't know whether he's impulsive with trade. We don't know whether he's incompetent in his negotiations because he treats tariffs as though they're hurting China and not the American consumer, and that's causing some internal problems. But the end result for South Africa...
Can you clarify that? Because I think it's something that people hear, who does it hurt? Tariffs. So tariffs are an additional cost, an additional tax.
And they're a regressive tax. So everybody has to pay them for the goods increasing in price.
Yeah, so you import a TV from China, you're going to pay a little bit more because the Chinese manufacturer has to pay that more to get it in. However, surely it does help US manufacturers because suddenly their televisions become more attractive, so the Chinese manufacturers
not really, and the industry is getting very, very nervous about this because it's very unstable. It raises the prices. It could impact on South Africa. To come back to the South African concern, if the Chinese economy starts to wobble and slow down, then they will have less demand for primary commodities, which we export to China in a big way, and it's very important for our economy. But there's a knock-on effect. If the U.S. consumers, the U.S. economy has been booming, but if it starts to falter because there's a lot of debt and there's a lot of internal problems with that economy, then the demand for automobiles goes down. And so all those Mercedes and BMWs that South Africa exports to Germany and that go on to the United States would be at risk. That's the short-term problem. The longer-term problem is the problems that Sharon was alluding to with the World Trade Organization. China has a lot of problems with the other countries on how it characterizes itself. Rob Davies points to the fact that China is no longer a developing country. It expects special privileges. You've got to deal with those questions, but you deal with it in a deliberative, careful, and considered way. That's the midterm, is to get that. But then also, I think, rightly so, the Minister of Trade and Industries, Rob Davies, points out that down the road there is looming a big conflict between China and the United States over robotics and over intellectual property and over the fourth industrial revolution, artificial intelligence. South Africa needs to have a competitive relationship between China and the U.S. managed within rules so that then South Africa can pick which product it wants. It shouldn't have one hegemon, whether it's the United States or whether it's China.
Should we play them off against each other?
Well, you know, China and the U.S. are big.
Don't know if we have the clout to even
but you know, China, but South Africa has enormous goodwill around the world. It's a member of the G20. It's now a non-permanent member of the Security Council, yet again. It has relationships with the BRICS. It has relationships with a lot of different countries. So therefore, it can work to build coalitions of the willing to try to moderate this rivalry. But you can't do that with Donald Trump in the White House. Now, Xi Jinping, the president of China, is the president for life, so he'll be there for a while. Thank heaven Cyril Ramaphosa has another 5 years, but Donald Trump, you know, is under enormous domestic pressures. He's got an election coming up in 2020. He could be impeached in the short term. How do countries deal with the United States when it's such an unpredictable, erratic, impulsive, and tweeting president?
Can you answer the fundamental questions for our viewers who may be lay people when it comes to economics? Is Donald Trump right or wrong? Because China does have this advantage. It's gained tech knowledge. It exports to the world. And we know that those steel imports that Sherwin was talking about, ArcelorMittal said it wiped us out because they have cheap labor and they're selling their steel much cheaper than any South African company could do.
Barack Obama took these problems very seriously, and what he did was put together a regional coalition called a Trans-Pacific Partnership. Donald Trump comes in and impulsively kills that off, and so he's doing it mano a mano, one-on-one, which is not the way you negotiate. Barack Obama negotiated a nuclear non-proliferation deal with the Iranians that all of the other partners, Europe and China and Russia, say Iran has been abiding by. Iran, like China, poses problems in different regions for different actors. But you don't do it with tweets and impulsive actions and betray your fundamental ignorance or your incompetence about the sophisticated problems and interactions that involved in either the Middle East conflicts or trade conflicts. And at last, Donald Trump betrayed in this trade thing that he doesn't understand that there's a tax involved here, and now he's scrambling around to compensate farmers who are in his base and are unhappy. And rest assured, China knows exactly what it's doing, so it's going to target its tariffs for those constituencies in Trump's base.
In an update to its World Economic Outlook report, the IMF said the sub-Saharan region as a whole now is expected to grow 3.8% in 2019. Now that's up 0.1% compared with April's forecast. But there was also a warning about the impact of tit-for-tat tariffs.
The United States has initiated trade actions affecting a broad group of countries and faces retaliation or retaliatory threats from China, the European Union, its NAFTA partners, and Japan, among others. Our modeling suggests that if current trade policy threats are realized and business confidence falls as a result, global output could be about 0.5% below current projections by 2020.
President Xi Jinping of China is in Africa this week. He'll pass through Senegal and Rwanda before heading to South Africa and the BRICS summit in Johannesburg. Africa plays a key role in Xi's Belt and Road plan. And China is Africa's largest trading partner. If Chinese-made products are hit with US tariffs, there could be a knock-on effect. Africa's share of global exports is low, making up just 2.4% of total global exports. 2/3 of sub-Saharan imports are finished products, and products shipped out to the rest of the world are dominated by raw materials. Africa's current internal trade is low too. Well, my next guest is the group CEO of Ecobank, which has a presence in over 30 African countries. Joining me now from London is Ade Ayemi. Good to have you with us, sir. So first of all, how would a global trade war impact the continent?
I think every war is not good, but from an African point of view, we are very focused on how we can ensure that we continue to participate in global trade, both the inbound to our continent, the outbound from our continent. We're very focused on what we can do to make sure that we continue to trade.
But how can you continue to trade at the same level if giants like the US, the EU, China are all coming down on each other with tariffs? That slows down international trade.
I'm sure they will find a way to work it out. What we'll rather focus on is what we can do to ensure we continue to improve the lot of our people, especially trading among ourselves in the African continent. The intra-African trade is very low. We're very focused on ensuring that because of the distribution of resources, wealth, and capabilities across the continent, we want to focus on being able to trade among ourselves first. And it's only when we can improve that ability to trade among ourselves, and I'm sure you know within the continent, we are signing the intra-Africa trade, the Continental Free Trade Area, to make sure that as a continent, we can continue to address ourselves as a single market. I think that is the single biggest opportunity in front of us that we need to realize first.
Give us a few more details about the potential of inter-Africa trade to overcome the problem of reliance on exporting commodities in particular.
If you think about this, so if you look at South Africa and Southern Africa, South Africa is the most developed technologically in the continent. Therefore, it should be possible for us to export raw materials from the Southern Africa to get produced in South Africa. If you look at the rest of the West African countries and the East African countries and North African countries, there are enough expertise if we ensure that the market is available for everybody to participate to ensure that industries can be located in all these countries. So from our point of view, we now see an opportunity to have 1 billion people, over 1 billion people, that is close to the population of India, now trading among ourselves, ensure that we can have much more faster growth than we used to have, and wealth can be distributed to the base of the economy.
At Davos yesterday, the South African Reserve Bank governor discussed protectionism and the potential negative effects this would have on sub-Saharan Africa. Now, what was discussed in particular was the AGOA trade agreement. Under this agreement, many sub-Saharan African countries can export goods duty-free into the US and vice versa. Now, although Trump has been very vocal about the US's current trade agreements, he's actually said very little about the AGOA trade agreement, and the reason for this is most probably because it makes up a very, very small part of America's US global imports. Now, second to that, if we look at the AGOA trade agreements, the US used to run a trade deficit under this agreement, but now there's actually far more of a trade balance, and the reason for this is that Africa exports far less petroleum products into the US than it used to be. So really there's no incentive for the US to cancel this agreement. On the other hand, let's say that Trump did actually repeal this agreement. What it could mean for sub-Saharan African countries is it could encourage more intra-Africa trade, which would be very beneficial for the continent as a whole.
On the growth outlook for the globe, including Africa, agreeing with the latest International Monetary Fund downgrade for growth within the continent.
Already that the International Monetary Fund has knocked 0.3 of a percentage point off their projected growth for sub-Saharan Africa, down to 3.1%. This is a worry. Businesses are withholding investment. They are reconsidering sourcing and production decisions. And we're seeing right now export orders are declining and manufacturing output is stalling. So we fear that there are dark clouds on the horizon, and that if we don't address the situation from a trade perspective as soon as we can, that there is the possibility things may even get worse.
However, some scholars are reasoning that existing economic blocs within the continent, as well as the ongoing ratification of the recently signed off African Continental Free Trade Agreement, would stimulate growth.
Thank you, Claire. East Africa alone, we have witnessed growth of trade from very low amounts to around 18 to 20 within the ES alone. That's not something small. And within the African continent alone, we are now rotating around 18% of intra-African trade and 19%. This is attributed to this regional integration, because when you integrate, you reduce tariffs and you also reduce non-tariff barriers.
On the other hand, a cross-section of trade activists and policy review experts are equally weighing in on the envisaged potential for the African Continental Free Trade Agreement.
But we must be aware, and go for regional integration, we are being entangled in some bilateral treaties which might negate that regional integration. The Economic Partnership Agreement is for one. And as I said, I hear the US wants also to enter into bilateral relationship with a number of countries, so that might make regional integration a very, very difficult proposition.
The latest ratification barometer of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement indicates that only 6 economies have since ratified the undertaking upon signing by 44 of the 55 member countries in March. Reina Ojon, NTV Business.